All right, I guess we can get started. Let me see. All right, I will. Perfect. Happy International Dark Sky Week, everybody. I am so glad that we have all joined today to hear from Cady Netland about, threats to birds in terms of not only human threats, but also threats from outdoor cats. We will also be She will also be talking, of course, about the importance of dark skies and kind of how that relates to birds, of course. I am so glad to see everybody today. I would love to hear more about how everybody International Dark Sky Week is going. If you haven't taken the pledge on our IDSW website, please do so. It is fantastic. We already have 3,000 pledges to protect the night, and I am so glad to see that number growing. We've also had so many proclamations come in, so many requests, and so many have been received. So to start off this particular webinar, I am going to introduce Cady, who is a coordinator at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where she has done programming and outreach and research about bird threats. And so with that, I am going to hand it off to Cady. Perfect.
Okay, give me 1 second here, folks. We need to quickly. Can everybody see my screen okay?
It looks perfect.
Okay, super. Just realized that my laptop charger fell out here, but I got it. So no worries. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. Thank you for sitting in on this discussion about bird collisions and how artificial light contributes to them. My name is Cady Netland. Like Callie said, I work as the coordinator for bird safety at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And my work generally revolves around mitigating human-caused threats to our avian populations. And right now, a lot of that focus is on bird glass collisions, a major contributor to mass avian mortality. And so we're going to learn about those today, and specifically how artificial light and light pollution contributes to this issue and general avian mortality as well. So a little bit about the lab to start. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology is a nonprofit dedicated to the study, appreciation, and conservation of birds. We focus on research, education, engaging the public in conservation, and we really believe in driving science to action. So educating people and equipping them with the tools that they need to really make a difference in their own communities and then the world at large. So let's jump right into it. More than 1 billion birds die in collisions with glass every year. Now, this statistic actually is referring to an estimate about bird collisions just in the United States every year. And so if that number seems catastrophic, unfortunately, it's because it is. And so why does this matter? In the last 50 years, we've lost nearly 3 billion birds. And it's really this staggering decline that amounts to the overall loss of almost 1/4 of all of the birds in the US. And the causes of these losses are generally habitat loss, the threat of predation from outdoor domestic and feral cats, and what we're going to talk about today, which is collisions. And so what all of these threats have in common is that they're all anthropogenic caused threats, which means that the solution to these problems are also human generated. So we have the capacity to turn back this tide of losing our avian populations, and it starts with our own action. But if we want to learn how to solve something, we need to know what causes it. So what causes collisions? The simple answer is glass. Now, there's a couple different kinds of collisions. There can be collisions with structures and a few other things that I'll mention later in this presentation. And there's definitely varying factors that can make this issue far larger or far more of a problem. But at its heart, the cause of collisions as an issue is the presence of glass. What most people think of when they think of birds flying into glass is transparent glass, because that's kind of something that we as people may have experienced not seeing and walking right into as well. So it makes sense to us that a bird may have the same problem. And that's true. Birds don't see glass as solid. And so they do try to fly through it if they're in pursuit of something they see in it. And that would often be vegetation or some other kind of habitat that triggers in their brain, oh, like that's good shelter, that could be a good place to forage for me. So that's when that collision's happening, when they're flying into glass thinking that they can access habitat. But what we don't think about as often is actually the reflectivity of glass can be just as dangerous as the transparency, and often in urban settings is actually usually the cause of collision, because most of those spaces that are transparent to, a lot of birds aren't necessarily trying to fly into an office, right? But in a lot of these situations, the glass is reflecting vegetation that's outside of the building, particularly as we do these really great things like start adding green spaces into our urban landscapes. That's wonderful. However, it is increasing the amount of times that there's this vegetation being reflected in glass that birds are perceiving as real habitat, trying to access, and then flying into glass and unfortunately generally passing away. Let's talk a little bit about how artificial light contributes to this problem. So first and foremost, artificial light is disturbing to migration. And I've added this visual to try to put us a little bit in the perspective of a bird. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's a very good visual for why birds might get pulled off of their migration paths here. If you look at the section on the left, the section that looks the most like stars are those stars in the sky. And a lot of our bird species that are migrating at night are utilizing stars to navigate that migration route and are instinctively drawn towards those lights as just part of their biology. They've evolved that way to have very successful and effective migration routes. And so when you look to the other side of that visual, what part of that visual looks the most like those stars in a light polluted sky? It really is the city skyline where you're seeing a lot of those pinpricks of light, which triggers for many bird species that instinctive draw towards that kind of light. That's how they evolved. And so when we're reducing the ability for birds to see stars in the sky and creating this very lit up landscape in our urban spaces, it's drawing birds into those urban landscapes where they're going to face a lot higher threats to their life from collision, from something called light entrapment that I'll talk about, from predation by urban species, and many other urban threats. And we know that this is a major contributing factor. Collisions are notably the highest during migration seasons, both fall and spring migration. And some of that can be explained by, for example, in the fall, the high presence of juvenile birds that are migrating because, they're less experienced and they're more physically vulnerable. And a portion of it can be explained by just the vast amounts of birds that are traveling in the sky during migration periods and through our spaces, which can lead to higher collisions. But it's also during this time when more than 80% of those species are migrating at night. And so they're incredibly vulnerable to the pull of artificial light from our urban spaces that draws them down into these places where they're then more at risk. And as they're flying, this light can attract them from more than 3 miles away. And once they're in those urban spaces, they're going to experience more collision, not just because they're in the presence of glass, but also because light, when it's directed upon or up at or behind glass, as we know, can visually enhance the characteristics of it that make collision the threat that it is to birds. So, I mean, light on glass can make it far more transparent and far more reflective. And so that can really make the issue a lot larger. They can also experience something called light entrapment, which is different, but still very threatening and can lead to collision. And that's when there's a large source of open light. For the example in this image, this is the 9/11 memorial light in New York City, which caused a huge issue, unfortunately, entrapping, thousands of birds at a time, where they get essentially completely illuminated by this false light and then find themselves extraordinarily disoriented and unable to break out of that light, which can lead to them flying around in circles for so long that they actually drop out of the sky from exhaustion, or to the point where they're around these other structures like buildings, and they're going to be so disoriented that they fly into glass or buildings or other structures trying to escape that light entrapment. And that doesn't need to be from a source as large as the 9/11 memorial. It's a phenomenon that's been recorded happening in smaller cases, and it's the reason, part of the reason why it's so important to advocate for light fixtures and light sources not just being turned off, like we're going to talk about later, but also being protected in a way that makes them bird safe from this kind of issue. On the right, you can see, the cat with the chickadee in its mouth. And this is just to enhance the concept that artificial light is drawing these birds into areas where they're more at risk from tons of different urban threats, whether that's domestic cats, other urban predators like raptors that hang out in cities, sometimes even coyotes in urban spaces, but also air pollutants from vehicles and from other urban sources, power lines. There's many different things in cities that are very life-threatening to birds, and so we want to reduce the amount of time that they're spending in our spaces and that we're drawing them down off of what's already a very harrowing journey for them. And this is just a better photo example of that light entrapment. Again, it's not always in these situations where it's this major beam into the sky. I want to emphasize that this can happen when people have large spotlight landscaping features at their home. And so it's really important to be advocating for our light fixtures and sources to be covered, downturned, shielded, and make sure that they're not pointing up into the sky where they're going to cause issues for birds. And I want to take a second to note that these collisions and some of the issues that are being caused by artificial light aren't just in our cities. They're kind of anywhere where there's human presence. It's been noted that offshore vessels and structures that are potentially isolated from urban areas or offshore um, are having this experience of collisions as well. Large cruise ships, oil rigs, boats that are out in the sea with a large throw of light are finding that seabirds, even just non-migratory seabirds, and then migrating songbirds and migrating other birds will come across a structure or a vessel that is lit up and so exhausted will be drawn into it, fly into it, and frequently experience collision at those structures as well. So it's important to note that it's not just in our cities, anywhere where there is large artificial light sources where it should normally be dark, there's going to be this interruption to our wildlife, even when we're not thinking that that may be a problem. So now the fun part, which is what can we do to help? It's really important to turn your lights out for birds. We know that turning lights out at night reduces the possibility of birds becoming attracted to light and being drawn into our urban spaces, being disoriented, and experiencing collision. Now, this isn't going to entirely prevent collision itself, but it can have a huge impact on the numbers of collisions that we're seeing and the size of the threat that it's posing to birds. And there's other benefits as well. Um, there's the conservation impact of turning your lights out because we're contributing to preserving our bird populations. But turning lights out is good for cost savings, for your home, for your business. It's important for energy conservation and for a building or for a home to be more green in general. I didn't put this on there, but it's good for your own natural cycles as a person and as an animal as well. And it's good for community engagement, getting involved in a lights out effort or an effort that you're joining in with your neighbors to make a difference can not only promote awareness in a community, but promote connection as well. So when to do it? I'm not going to be someone to tell you not to turn your lights out all the time. I think if you have the availability and the ability to turn your lights off or encourage your neighbors or local businesses to turn their lights off uh, overnight throughout the year, I think that's fantastic and I don't see the harm in it. But it's most important to turn your lights off during spring migration, which I list as the full periods of March through June. If you go to Birdcast, they have some more very specific dates for certain regions where it's going to be the highest migration period for you. But if you want to keep it safe, March through June, and then fall migration falls during the period of August through November. And so those months are the most important to be turning your lights out from dusk till dawn when it would normally be dark, reducing light pollution in the sky, and helping to protect migrating birds. The other important thing is following bird-safe lighting guidelines. So I talked a little bit about this with light entrapment and how that can be an issue, but also in terms of reducing general light pollution, there's ways to do that that don't involve just turning lights out. And this can be a really important way to advocate for certain light policies to, say, your city council or to state legislators, because there are places that have lighting guidelines in place for their city structures. And so it is a possible avenue for people to advocate for and get something in place for the city or the town or the area that they live in. But also just at your own home or property, if you have lighting fixtures that are outside, that are inside, that are lighting up your driveway, you can see in this graphic, which thank you, dark sky, the left side is a completely open light fixture. It doesn't have any shielding, and so it's throwing light all over the place. And we really don't need our light to be going up into the sky in that way. If there are places that do need to be illuminated at night, and I'm not saying that there aren't, because I understand that in certain places there's a safety risk, many different reasons. The way to do it is to look into covering lights, down shielding them, and just trying to reduce that problem as much as possible. So that can be done in a whole manner of different ways. And it depends on what the lighting fixture is. But in general, it should just be to kind of cover how that light is going into the air. For me also, and for the issue of collision, covering how it's impacting nearby glass. And you can also put it on a motion sensor or a timer sensor to reduce just how often that light is on. Now I have a couple more specific suggestions, and I think it can fall down into just 6 simple ways that you can reduce light pollution and artificial light in your home and business. And if you follow those 6 directions, we can make a really big difference into how much this lighting issue is affecting birds. So the first being just turn off your lights in your home and office overnight, and particularly during migration periods. Now, if it's not possible to do that all the time or throughout that entire period, you can focus on a couple more targeted actions. So that would be turning off lights anywhere where you're seeing that greenery meeting glass. And that addresses what I was talking about earlier about where birds are seeing vegetation reflected in or through glass. You're not going to want to have light enhancing those areas because that's going to increase the potential that birds are going to strike that glass. That's also why I specified turning off outdoor lighting fixtures, because outdoor lighting fixtures, again, tend to be in those spaces where greenery and vegetation is meeting glass and really enhancing that issue. If you can't turn lights out, you can dim them. You can use curtains inside your home, blinds inside your home to reduce how much light is escaping your home or business or building. Again, you could use sensor or motion or timed controlled lights to reduce just how often those lights are on. And another way that you can help is choosing warmer, less bright light bulbs. And there's some more specific information and direction on exactly what color that is and how bright in some spaces on Dark Sky International's website, as well as the stopbirdcollisions.org website. But it's been proven that warmer, less bright light bulbs have less of an intense impact on birds. Again, still better to turn them off altogether, but these are some ways to help assist if there's certain light fixtures that cannot be or shouldn't be like fully turned off all the time. And this is kind of just a good synthesis about those 5 principles that you should follow to reduce light pollution. And this is a downloadable resource that you can download yourself from Dark Sky International and share with others. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with your neighbors. So I just wanted to redirect people to that resource as well, because these are some helpful directions. Another good way to kind of take note of when it's most important to be mitigating your lights and when specifically those peak migration periods are happening near you is to use Birdcast, which is a tool developed by a team at the Lab of Ornithology. And you can just Google Birdcast and it will come up with live migration forecasts, live migration maps, forecast migration maps, and also sections on peak migration periods near you and also migration data near you. And so if you go onto that website, you can check out nightly or weekly, what the forecast is for migration and start really advocating with people near you to turn their lights off during those periods to really have a higher impact. So, as important as all of these things are, and for so many reasons to turn lights out at night, like I mentioned, all of the other benefits, in terms of collisions, it's important to keep in mind that reducing light pollution, mitigating light sources can be really helpful to reducing the level of threat of collision for birds, but it's a measure that has to be done alongside making glass visible to birds in order to fully prevent the problem. Because at the end of the day, glass is the reason why birds are striking and dying. And so I'm going to talk about a couple ways that you can make glass visible to birds and really prevent this issue alongside turning those lights out. There's 2 main rules, which is that treatments should be placed externally on glass for that reason I talked about earlier, which is the reflectivity of the glass. And whatever that treatment is, unless it's Acopian bird savers, which can be spaced a little bit farther apart, and I'll talk about that in a second, the pattern on the glass should be spaced 2 by 2 inches apart. A good example of that is the dot pattern on this glass that you can see here. When you look at it up close, you see the dots, pretty well, but actually from far away, it can be really difficult for the human eye to even perceive these patterns, but it can really make a huge difference for birds. They've proven that certain treatments like this feather-friendly film that's on this glass can be up to 90 to 95% effective in preventing collisions. And so it can be a really helpful resource, but it has to be that 2 by 2 inch spaced pattern because otherwise birds think that they can kind of fit their wingspan through it the way that they might fly into a small gap into a bush or in a tree, other vegetation. And our small species like kinglets and hummingbirds, you know, they need that 2 by 2 because they think that they can squeeze through even the tiniest of spaces. And so Feather Friendly is a company that you can look into that provides these vinyl film, these patterned vinyl film that's been tested very effectively to prevent bird collisions. And they offer a range of products that can be small scale to large scale installations, depending on what kind of project you need. It's very easy to navigate. There's certain products that they have that you can do yourself at your own home, or if you're doing a much larger project that, may require some more professional installation, but there's a lot of options. And then on the other side of this screen is what's called Acopian bird savers. And these are a series of paracords that have been strung over windows. And if they're being left untethered, these can actually be left 4 inches apart because the movement from the wind makes them kind of cover that area, even if it's not 2 inches spaced apart. And it's been shown that even just having those paracords over your windows can break up that reflectivity and that transparency of glass enough that birds will avoid and be protected from collision with that. So, and that's something that you can do yourself. There's a couple other options that you can do yourself. So to make basically your own Acopian bird savers, you just need an 1/8 inch round paracord in whatever color you want and however you want to attach it to the top of your window frames, as long as it hangs down and is spaced at least 4 inches apart. It's a really quick, cheap and easy way to prevent collisions at your home because it can be kind of adapted to different sizes of windows and from different heights, which can be really helpful. And then other do-it-yourself solutions that you can have is painting those windows with tempera paint. This is a fun one if you've got, kids at home or you yourself just want to bring some creative energy into your life. Again, as long as those patterns are spaced 2 by 2 inches apart, have creative liberty with it and have fun. And just breaking up that reflection on the outside is what's going to prevent collisions. And then there's also a way that you can just use a simple sign, a for rent sign that you buy from home, like Home Depot, and space out your own dot holes on it and utilize it as a stencil. And I'm going to provide you guys with a resource that has more direct instructions on how exactly you can do that if you would like to kind of go the stencil route. So that can be a really good way to get that pattern on the glass in a really cheap and effective way that you can do yourself. So those were all of some really good solutions that you can take to mitigate this issue at home, not just making glass visible to birds, but reducing light pollution, reducing artificial light in our urban spaces and its impact on birds. And I just want to give a call out to a wonderful partnership that has just recently formed in the last year, called the Bird Collision Prevention Alliance. And this partnership is a coalition of agencies, conservation groups, industry leaders. I mean, it stretches over 100 organizations that are involved in this group, including Dark Sky International and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and American Bird Conservancy, who I see representatives from today. And this group is really working to promote these solutions to this issue and really bring this to people's awareness and encourage people to understand that they have the ability to take action against this immediately and at their own homes, in their own backyards, and in their own communities. And so there's a brand new website associated with this alliance that has way more details about this problem, how you can solve it, links to all of those directions on how to do do-it-yourself solutions at your own home. And so I'm going to link that in the chat as well. But if, for example, you leave this webinar with some further questions, there's an FAQ page on that website. There's a lot more information, and there's also a way that you can contact us through that website and get some direct questions answered if they don't get answered today. And so that is my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited to hear the questions you have and hope that I can answer some of them effectively.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that really, really insightful talk, Cady. I even learned a little bit more about bird collisions and what I can do to prevent them. I myself have only seen those those window vinyls. So it's good to see that even tempera paint, is a way to also prevent them running into the window and seeing that reflection. So something my kids will enjoy. So. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. As Cady said, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat as we start our Q&A section of this webinar. Or you can even put it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen as well. But to get started, we do have a few questions. And the first one is, when birds are exposed to intense outdoor lighting, are the effects permanent or can they recover over time?
That's a good question. I think, are they asking in terms of like their vision, if they're impacted by it?
Probably.
Okay. Um, so I'm not 100% the most versed in avian anatomy. It's my understanding that light exposure like that wouldn't, to my understanding, permanently blind a bird. But the issue is that a lot of them don't make it to that recovery period, unfortunately. When they're exposed to that kind of light, a lot of these birds are just very vulnerable to begin with. Um, Migration is no joke. They're kind of constantly being hit by different threats from all directions, and so even the smallest thing that makes them more vulnerable can be the thing that decides whether they make it or not. So even temporary blindness, disorientation, confusion, unfortunately for a lot of these birds, is kind of that tipping point into whether they make it on their journey or not. Um, I would hope that eventually they would be able to recover from something like that. But yeah, I guess the answer is unfortunately many of them don't make it to even be able to recover because that disorientation leads to them passing away from some other cause.
Yeah. I imagine it's something along like a deer in headlights or when we see those really bright LEDs and it kind of like stuns us for a second and like, yeah, it only takes a minute. So I understand. The next, do we know the percentage of birds that die from collisions during the daytime as opposed to nighttime?
Do we see? Oh, yeah, yes, birds can collide with glass at any time during the day. It's a good question. The reason why we are seeing so much higher numbers, it's actually not generally happening right at night. It's generally happening during migration during what's called the fly down or fly up period. So when birds are migrating, they're flying down to stop in stopover areas during migration and then flying back up. And so they're being drawn towards these lights and then they're stopping in areas, unfortunately, because they've been taken off their migratory route into areas where there's a huge presence of glass. So they're flying down into that vegetation and either on their way in or very frequently on their way back up. Both times they're down in that vegetation where there's lots of glass. And so coming down into it or coming out of it is when they're flying into that glass because they're tired, they're weakened from their journey, they're pretty desperately seeking shelter and food, and they're seeing that habitat reflected. So it's usually during that like dusk to dawn period, actually, which is why you'll see a lot of collision monitors setting alarms for like 3:30 in the morning to go look for collisions because they're striking and then the bodies are unfortunately being removed from that location, whether it's by predators who know that collisions are happening at certain areas, or are, you know, crepuscular as well and hunting around that time, or sometimes building managers and people that are up early cleaning up areas. So frequently those collisions are happening during that dusk dawn period, but collisions can happen at any time during the day. And usually for year-round resident birds, you'll see that anytime during the day. If you have feeders at your house that are close to glass, they can fly into your windows at any point. So
Yeah, I actually had that happen at my last apartment and I felt really bad and I can't believe it actually happened. So we
mhm,
did move our feeder farther away.
that's good.
Um, Speaking of predators, there was a question that asked, can you talk more about how much of an effect the predation of stray animals has on bird populations?
Stray animals. Um, I mean, the number one issue here is cats. I'm a cat owner. I'm a cat lover. And because I'm a cat owner and cat lover, there's a lot of reasons to keep your cats indoors. And I think that there's a whole other presentation that you guys are having or someone's having. World Migratory Bird Day is hosting a webinar about this as well. Unfortunately, outdoor cats contribute to over 3 billion birds dying every single year in the United States. It's a huge, huge, huge problem, but unfortunately, it can be a tricky problem to solve compared to mitigating glass with birds, because there's a lot more of a human component to stray cats or to people's own pets. But in terms of other stray animals, I mean, all of these birds are, they're basically, a lot of the birds that are experiencing collision are songbirds, migratory songbirds, who effectively are the snacks of the natural world. Like anything will eat them. So when I worked at Bird Safe Maine in Portland, Maine, the huge issue we had was gulls eating the birds before we could record the collisions. So it's kind of all animals. They get eaten by everything.
That is really unfortunate. Okay. So do you have any information on what kind of greenery tends to lead to bird collisions more when placed near glass?
Oh, yeah. Um, It's it's not the answer that I wish I could give you because I agree. I think I saw this comment saying that it's this dilemma between how wonderful it is to add greenery to our urban spaces and then how it can contribute to this issue. Unfortunately, native vegetation is potentially more of an issue, and that's because birds, you know, it draws birds in. That's why we like encouraging people to use native vegetation in their gardens and yards and landscaping because it's the habitat that birds seek. So it's good to use. I am not discouraging the use of native vegetation. I don't want to solve, I think that would be a bad way to solve the problem, would be to like not encourage people to add greenery to urban landscapes and increase native vegetation at our homes. But yeah, unfortunately, native vegetation, because birds are so drawn into it, if that's right up next to glass, you're that's potentially going to be a problem. But the real problem is not the vegetation, it's the glass. So
Understood. And speaking of adding things to homes, we had a question about infrastructure, which was, oh gosh, apologies. Let me find it real quick. But somebody asked that aside from adding window vinyls and the strings you know, 2 inches apart, I believe, to their homes, if they wanted to do something more, do you have any advice on changing the infrastructure of their home? Like anything that they could add if they were building a home or
oh yeah. Oh, definitely. And I linked to the stopbirdcollisions.org solutions page in the chat, and that has some more direct solutions. And the website is soon to have more information on bird safe glass. And if you'd like more information on bird safe glass, bird safe architecture, American Bird Conservancy currently has some really good resources for building new buildings in a way that's bird safe. So if you'd like to learn more about that, that's a really great resource. Um, but if you're replacing glass in your home, there are absolutely products on the market that have bird safe patterns that are put into the glass, whether that's through acid etching or ceramic frit, or even now digital printing, which is really cool. There's all kinds of products that are coming onto the market as there starts to be this drive for this product. So the more that we want these products, the more that the technology machine is going to start cranking out solutions that work for every single different person. We're already seeing cutting edge technology coming out in this field. So I highly recommend looking into it. Sometimes it can be more long-term cost effective. It seems more expensive upfront, but if you intend to live in your home for the rest of your life, it may be a conversation to have to look into what replacing the glass in your home would mean rather than replacing a treatment on that glass every 15 to 20 years. So,
Wow. Yeah, those are really great ideas. Also, somebody brought up the idea of bird bath positions. Are there any thoughts on bird bath positions to reduce collisions?
yeah, great question. So landscaping issues in terms of collision are starting to be more talked about as well. Anything that is considered a bird attractant, so native vegetation, like I was talking about, bird baths, feeders, the general rule for that around glass, right, has been discussed as the 3 by 30 foot rule. Now, that's been, some people disagree with it as a recommendation, but it's generally thought that if it's farther than 30 feet away, a bird bath or a feeder, the likelihood is that it's going to be closer to the natural resource than to glass, to the point that the bird will go to the resource rather than try to access the resource in the glass, if that makes sense. And then if it's right up on the glass, like if you put a feeder suction cupped to your glass, I don't know about I wouldn't put a bird bath like right under your window, but same kind of idea. The concept is even if they are to fly into the window, they're not able to get enough velocity to have impact that will cause critical injury or death. Um, Again, I think mitigation stuff can be helpful, but at the end of the day, wherever you position your feeders or bird baths, or if you have birds that are coming close to your home and that are coming to bird attractants in your yard or by your house, and you have exposed glass that's reflecting those things, then the chances are that you're going to experience collision.
Wow. Speaking of bird vision, in their sight, are you aware of any evidence behind the idea that blue-green light is less disorienting to migratory
I've definitely seen that there's been some research coming out about different colors and how it impacts birds. And this was a huge discussion about UV light, because there's been a large effort to try to create bird safe products that are UV reflective, because many bird species see in the UV and we as humans don't. And so the aim would be to have some kind of solution that birds can see, but we can't. Um, I I think it's really interesting and important to investigate how different colors and different light frequencies may have different levels of impact on bird species for a variety of reasons, in terms of how it might impact them in other ways, because I know that light can impact bird species in other ways that I'm not as familiar with. But in terms of collisions, I tend to stay away from recommending solutions that may not be comprehensive, because there are so many different bird species and there's over 300 species that are known to have been recorded experiencing collision in the US. And so finding a comprehensive anatomical solution for 300 species of birds is quite difficult, because there's going to be a lot of variety on what is going to impact them in different ways, if that makes sense. And that's kind of why I tend to focus my solution-based recommendations on resolving the issue of glass. But that sounds really interesting. I'll look more into it.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I know you had brought up in the presentation like warmer lighting as well. And just kind of following along the lines of the five principles, of course, targeted lighting. Um, and so another question that's kind of along those lines is oh my gosh, my apologies.
Good.
Can birds learn to recognize and avoid brightly lit buildings? And is it possible for that knowledge to be shared with their colonies, perhaps through vocalizations or something similar, like other mammals do?
To my knowledge, no. Again, I can't state anything 100% one way or the other because I don't think it's been studied. So I don't know that there's any concrete proof one way or the other. Um, learning bright buildings. mm, I I I haven't heard of anyone researching that. I don't. I think the memory capacity of the majority of the birds that are experiencing collision wouldn't necessarily be the best for that kind of thing. I know Christine's here. She may have like more, or maybe she left, but she might have more ideas on that. I would say no, for the most part. We're not seeing as many, I mean, we're not seeing as many corvids striking. They do. So perhaps that would be an interesting thing for someone to study on a bird species that has the capacity to generationally transmit warning information. But for the most part, I would say that that's not a possibility for bird species and their evolution that has brought them to a modern world that they're not evolutionarily prepared for.
Gotcha, gotcha. And I know that you spoke a little bit about birds seeing in UV and then humans not. And so another question was, do birds see with a kind of night vision, so bright lights are disorienting? Is that, do you think?
Um, yeah, most bird species that are migrating, I mean, bird species that are migrating at night have the capacity to see in lower uh, light levels than we do, yes.
Very
I
interesting.
wouldn't, I don't know, again, I don't study avian visual anatomy myself, so I don't know if the term night vision is the correct term for it, but I can confirm that they can see in lower lighting than we can. So,
Yeah, perfect. Um, Somebody else asked, are there any key studies or resources you'd recommend for learning more about bird collisions and migration? And are there outreach materials we could use to help educate others?
do you want like they want scientific studies? Um,
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it sounds like research that's been written by others on this specific topic. Anything you could.
yeah, so I would, if you're interested in something like that, I would set a alert on a scientific journal that you pay attention to, like JSTOR or Birds of the World, because new research comes out about this, or is starting to come out about this more and more frequently as it becomes more of a topic of concern for people. In terms of previous resource, again, American Bird Conservancy has a really good list of the previous research that has been done on this. A large amount of the foundational research that was done on this subject was done by Professor Daniel Clem from Muhlenberg College. And so if you want to kind of learn about where some of this research started, his work can be a good one to look at. And then there's been a couple, there was one that was released by a team from the Smithsonian that I can't list off right off the bat. But check out American Bird Conservancy's resources. And then in terms of outreach materials, partially because I developed it, so I hope it's a useful resource, I would really highly recommend looking through the stopbirdcollisions.org website. And there's a whole page on just solutions, and you can look through and find which one works best for you in that moment. If you are a renter that lives in a high-rise building and you don't have the capacity to alter the windows at the building you live in, there are ways that you can get involved in this issue, and help start mitigating collisions in your community and advocating for this. So check out that side of the website. I think that that's a really, hopefully, good resource to share with people who you'd like to get a more basic understanding of this.
That's super helpful. And I put the link in the chat as well about the stopbirdcollisions.org as well. So,
Thank you.
um, is there a specific dependency between the spectral ranges used by lamps and bird collisions with windows?
Spectral ranges used by lamps. The the
I think
light frequency?
I assume the brightness of the lighting. Yeah.
Um, I don't know the specific answer to that question. I would imagine that just the brighter if the question is about the brightness of light, the brighter the light is that's being directed on glass and enhancing the transparency and reflectivity of the glass, potentially the higher the risk of collision. So yes, I would say that the more light, the more artificial light, the more exposed it is, the more it's on glass, around glass, the higher it's increasing the chance of collision. But again, collision can happen and if there's glass, collision can happen at any time in any lighting levels. So
Yeah. And then just because we have a few more minutes, make sure if you have any questions, input them in the chat so I can get them hopefully read by the time we end. But our next question is, oh my gosh, I just logged out of my questions. Could you recap the effects of light pollution or the over-industrialization of cities on birds? For example, in places without skyscrapers, light pollution still leads to disorientation and disruption in the flyaways. And let me know if you want me to read that question again.
just that general light pollution is bad for birds across, oh yeah, anywhere. It's disrupting their natural behavior. I mean, it's not just that it's leading to collision, it has an impact like on any wildlife. It's an unnatural source for them, in a natural world. And so it's going to have impact on their behavior regardless of collision. And also, and I should have emphasized this in my presentation, but collisions actually are the majority of the time happening at low rise and residential buildings. Skyscrapers are definitely an issue in that there's a lot of glass, there's a lot of space. But again, if you're thinking about where vegetation is that birds are going down to, it's going to be anywhere that's below the tree level. And so those top levels of skyscrapers aren't necessarily where we're seeing collisions happening because, I mean, I'm sure on the rare occasion, a bird maybe flies into glass thinking that it's open sky, but for the most part, it's in these areas where vegetation is. And because there are simply far more low-rise and residential buildings than there are skyscrapers, even if an individual skyscraper kills, you know, 1,000 birds in a season, which is horrendous. Um, Maybe it's in an area where there's 200,000 residential homes. And so if each of those homes experiences 0 to 1 collisions, you're still seeing over 200, potentially 200,000 or more collisions just from residential areas rather than that one building. And so this is why it must be a really large community effort because it's the small numbers for a lot of buildings that are adding up to this colossal number, not these necessarily large numbers that are coming from just large buildings. Definitely huge things and definitely buildings that need to be mitigated, right? So I saw someone ask about a success story. A huge success story to look into is the work that was done at the McCormick Place Center in Chicago. They had a mass collision event that resulted in over 1,000 birds that passed away in a night. Um, and they've done a incredible job retrofitting the entire center and reducing this issue. But again, it's an issue that's in all of our backyards. And because there's just so many residential and low-rise homes, um, when people think, oh, I don't need to change that one window at my house, that's such a big problem. That's not true. Because if we all say that, then that adds up to millions of birds. So yeah, light pollution anywhere, drawing them in is a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, I actually didn't even think about how like skyscrapers are not so much an issue because there aren't trees up there, but down lower, of course. So yeah, very impactful for me. And then to end it off, we have about 5 minutes or so, but any thoughts on a particular songbird that's most vulnerable to collisions?
Yeah, so that's like a particular species.
Mhm. Sure.
Well, that is very region specific, and I actually encourage all of you, if you go ahead and look into this issue, to become a champion for the species that are in your area. Learn about the birds that are in your community and treat and regard them as your own community members that you want to protect. Because it is an issue for birds everywhere, but where you live, getting to know who those birds are and what their life story is and where they're coming from, it can really make the issue very personal. And it is different regional specific. I mean, we know that it is more migratory songbirds. Uh, we know that it tends to be prey species, insectivores, and forest dwelling birds. And again, all of that is about their behavior for short, small bursts of movement from vegetation to vegetation. Insectivore species that are tend to be vegetation dwelling, forest dwelling, tree dwelling species are used to moving in a way to constantly be evading predation and also to be seeking insects very quickly. And so their movements are very fast, rapid, and impulsive. Um, and when they're around glass, that can be deathly for them. So it does tend to be those species. And I could nerd out about this for a while, but anatomically, those species, as prey species, their eyes are actually further on the side of their head. And so their binocular vision is actually reduced. Their ability to see focused in front of them is reduced. And it's even more reduced in flight while they're scanning for predators. So they're actually even evolutionarily and anatomically less able to potentially pick up on the minute visual cues in and around glass that we as humans use to detect where glass is. So that's also part of why we think they may be at higher risk of collision. But yeah, get to know the species near you, and I'm sure if there is a collision monitoring group near you, they will have answers for you about which species they're seeing collide more. When I was in Portland, Maine, for example, it was uh, white crowned sparrows and common yellow throats. So it depends on where you are.
Wow. Very insightful, and I love it when you nerd out a little bit. Um, so we're gonna end the Q&A there. I want to give you space to have any last thoughts or words about bird collisions or the impact we ourselves have on birds. So I'm gonna give you the space to say any last thoughts.
Thank you so much, Callie. And you did such a great job hosting this and making this really smooth. And I hope everyone got their answers that they were looking for and learned something. I'm just excited to see this many people that are joining in on a Wednesday from all these different places to learn more about this. And I think I get to talk about this for an hour, but my goal is that you guys get to go and talk about this for far longer with the people around you, because you really have the power to champion this issue. And I say this all the time as conservationists and people who care about nature, we very frequently feel quite hopeless and powerless about a lot of the issues that are happening for our wildlife. But this really is an issue that we all can go and do something about today. If you go and take a bar of soap and draw on the outside of your windows right now, like you could prevent collisions at your house. And it's so rare that we get that opportunity to take action immediately to help wildlife around us. And so I think it's a really special opportunity to take that action, protect the wildlife that we care so much about, and get your community involved and activated. So I hope you all go forward and carry this with you to more people. That's my goal.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Cady, for your amazing and insightful presentation on bird collisions and what you are doing to help bird migrations and just the bird species in general. I know I've come away with a few tips and tricks. Like I really do want to paint my windows now with my children. I think that would be really fun. And so I hope everyone else did as well. I am so glad to see so many of you come and enjoy the presentation. I see people answering questions and really connecting in the chat, which is fantastic. I want to say another happy International Dark Sky Week to everybody. If you haven't already, please do check out the IDSW website at idsw.darksky.org that Chris has linked over in the chat to see how else you can get involved in protecting the night. It's not just about what's above us, but everything that is connected to the sky as well. Like we just talked about, birds, really, really important to our environment. And so I am going to post another direct chat link to see how you can get involved, which includes the pledge. Also, we have a few more webinars coming up this week as well. Please register for those. And then Cady, do you want to pop in the link to Stop Bird Collisions just one more time for
Yes,
anyone that may have missed it?
thank you. Oh, and remember to turn your lights out. I should have said that.
Yeah, if you don't need them, don't use them. So, but if you need them, maybe target them. So again, thank you all for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of the week. I hope to see you again in another webinar and go International Dark Skies. Woo! All right. Have a
Sally.
great night.